कहता खुद को राही था और रहनुमाई पर मामूर था। महफिल सजाई हमने थी, लूटा उसने भरपूर था। हो के वो शायर मुझसे कुछ दूर था, पर जुबां मेरी थी और उसका उबूर था।
मीर और गालिब का सुरूर था, अल्लामा इकबाल का शऊर था। फैज व फराज के हुजूर में इनकिलाब जरूर था।
गो के वो शायर मुझसे कुछ दूर था, पर जुबां मेरी थी और उसका उबूर था। झंडा मेरा हरा सफ़ेद, उसका अजोर था। मिलवाना हम अलबेलों को, रवानी का मंशूर था।
गो के वो मुल्क मुझसे कुछ दूर था, वो जुबान मेरी हुई, मेरा मकसद उबूर था। शायरों का हर लफ्ज़ मुझे इतना गयूर था, मेरे मुंह में जैसे कोई सरमस्त अंगूर था।
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Raw Pods, Conversations in Creative Thought and Expression, hosted by Rawanee. We have today with us a very, very special and a talented guest who we're all very eager to get to know, Daniele Speziale. And if I say his name correctly, Daniele Speziale,
Yes.
who goes by the pen name of Raahi Itaalvi. We are all quite intrigued by Daniel's journey. He is of Italian origin. He's lived in different parts of the world, which of course I would be very keen to know about. He writes brilliant poetry in Urdu, the kind that native Urdu speakers struggle to write themselves. And not just that, but he is well versed in 15 languages. And he doesn't plan on stopping anytime soon, as far as I understand, and we really don't want him to either. So since we are very curious, we will be asking him a series of questions as to what inspired him to learn the way he does, languages, poetry, what his own writing inspirations are. But before that, just to give you all a sense of who Daniel is, I'll be sharing a clip from a recent event that we had, and then we'll start the event.
तू महफिल में नहीं शामिल, बता राही कहाँ है तू। गुबार आलूदा से उस्ताद निस्यन पर वही हूँ मैं। You're not in the mahfils lately, you're not in the poetry gathering lately. Tell us, Rahi, where are you? I am on that cupboard catching dust with all the things forgotten. That is where I am.
So yes, that was our last mehfil. We were all equally surprised and impressed. And we continue to be. So after we had that mehfil, we had this really excited conversation in our WhatsApp group, and everybody was talking. It was Rafi's idea initially to write a poem about Daniel. Nadir actually went ahead and did it, and the poem really captures very well the excitement that we all felt at discovering Daniel's talent. So Nadir, I'll hand over to you to read that to us.
And I've just added one more stanza to it. It's the second one. So this is how it goes. गो के वो शायर मुझसे कुछ दूर था, पर जुबां मेरी थी और उसका उबूर था। झंडा मेरा हरा सफ़ेद, उसका अजोर था। मिलवाना हम अलबेलों को, रवानी का मंशूर था। नाम से था दानिश्वर, अंदाज में गयूर था। मेरे हम वतनों के लिए दूर लटका अंगूर था। कहता खुद को राही था और रहनुमाई पर मामूर था। महफिल सजाई हमने थी, लूटा उसने भरपूर था। हो के वो शायर मुझसे कुछ दूर था, पर जुबां मेरी थी और उसका उबूर था। I would credit Rafe for giving the inspiration, and obviously Daniel for really mesmerizing us all with his delivery, his poetry as well. So
I mean, thank you. I mean, this is like the most flattering thing anyone can receive ever. Having a poem dedicated to you is just like something else.
well, it came naturally. So I guess it was a mutual thing. Rafe felt that we should celebrate your presence there, and it just clicked. The words came in my head, and I thought I'll just post it there. So
And I am guilty of not writing it up till now.
No pressure.
Very bad, very bad. इंतजार में हूँ
One day, inshallah. Ek din zarur.
Well, no pressure, but like, we're talking for an hour. I'm sure at the end of this hour, you may have put a few words together.
But that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah. But anyhow, I think now this poem captures really well how we all felt. And, just for those who weren't in the event and who listen to this later, that event was pretty special in its own way because we had some very, very talented award-winning poets, from other stanzas and of course from Rawanee as well. But Daniel really stole the event. And, I'll move on to the part where we get to know who he really is and how, this talent came to be. So Daniel, tell us a little bit about yourself, your early life, where you grew up, and your first interaction with poetry and other languages.
Okay, yeah. So I was actually born in Switzerland in a small town called Grenken, and the reason is that my grandparents were migrants. They had migrated to Switzerland from South Italy for better prospects, and my mom was raised as a second-generation migrant. And I was born myself in Switzerland, but we repatriated to Italy as soon as I was born. So I pretty much spent my whole life in, well, not really because I moved abroad, but I spent my entire teenagerhood in Italy, in childhood, and I'm still an Italian resident. I'm in my hometown right now, Savona, which is a very small town on the coast. And my early life was not too exciting. Up to high school, it was not too exciting. I was a bit of the loner, nerdy kind of guy who's just reading books all the time, and I think that shows. And also, when I was very young, when I was like maybe 3 or 4 or 5 years old, I don't remember. My mom, she was trying to teach me Swiss German. And ironically, I really did not care about learning German because I did not see the point of learning another language. As a kid, you just want to use Italian because that's what your friends are speaking and you speak in the family. So I think that must have given me some imprinting though on language learning. And funnily enough, when I was young and people asked me what I want to do when I grow up, I always said I want to be an explorer. And very figuratively, it has happened because I'm exploring languages, cultures. I had a fair share of experiences abroad. And insofar as my language learning journey goes, I think it really only started at the end of middle school, which in Italy is like maybe 14 or 13 years old. Now, I don't know why. Like, I don't, it's not exciting as an answer, but I don't remember how it started. All I know is at some point, I really wanted to learn Mandarin Chinese. I told my parents, I want to learn Chinese. And luckily, they did not think I was crazy. They took me seriously and they actually got me a textbook for self-learners. And I started learning Chinese. I think I must have watched some James Bond or Indiana Jones kind of movies where the protagonist speaks a lot of languages and travels, and it's very cool. So maybe I was impressed by that. I don't know. And so I started picking up Chinese. I started speaking it with the Chinese community here. And after that, one by one, I started discovering more and more languages that I didn't even know existed. Like very few Italians know that Urdu exists, or that Persian is still spoken, or that Tamil, like what is Tamil? Is it food or something? But I was like really delving deep into this, and I was discovering that it helped me connect maybe with migrants here, diasporas here. During high school, I started teaching Italian for migrants. It was a volunteer thing that I was doing, and that really exposed me to a lot of languages. Persian with the Afghans, Bengali with the Bangladeshis, and so on. And this is a bit how it started with languages. And with poetry, it started relatively late. It actually started later than languages. Now, when I read biographies of poets, it usually reads like this poet started reading poems at 5 years old, and started composing poems at 8 years old, and by 10 he had a published divan or something. It's nothing like that for me. I started in my second year of high school, so maybe 15 or 16 years old. We have to do Italian literature in school, and we were reading this poet called Petrarca. He's also known as Petrarch in English. He's the guy who popularized the sonnet. So authors like Shakespeare later drew from him, using the sonnet form. And it was a very medieval, idealizing love kind of poetry. This guy was kind of crazy, kind of extreme. He was running away from the city because he was in love and he didn't want other people to find out. And obviously he couldn't escape from this feeling because it was following him everywhere. And I guess I was always a bit cheesy and a bit romantic myself. And when I was reading these poems, well, maybe I was having my first crush in high school and stuff like that. I was really relating to it, I was like, well, there is someone who feels intensely, and I find my feelings reflected in what I'm reading. And until now, I think that's one of the biggest powers of poetry, is that you might feel feelings that you don't know how to put into words and you don't really understand. And then someone is just condensing them and capturing them into this very beautiful sounding, rhyming sonnet that's like some 13 or 14 lines, and it says everything, and it's just an amazing feeling. But one last thing I will say is that I had not yet started writing poetry. I actually started at the end of high school. I was writing some very, very bad poetry. Let's forget about it. But after high school was over, I actually started taking it more seriously. I had moved to the Netherlands to do my master's in political science, and I was feeling very out of place. I was very, very depressed, and it was a bit of a way to deal with my own feelings and note down my feelings. And until now, one of the poems I'm most proud of, but I don't really share. First, because it's very lengthy, and second, because it's very personal and intimate. It's this collection of poetry I had written when I was in the Netherlands. It was called Jewels of Pain because I was in pain, but I was sort of like turning it into jewels. So that's what I had called it. And that's pretty much how and where it started.
I think it's a very interesting story. Like you said, it sounds like a regular childhood story, but you can see the signs of that multilingualism, the fact that your grandparents were migrants. I think that in itself exposes you, without trying, to different languages, and then moving back, and you working with migrants, teaching them Italian. I can imagine that that gave you that kind of exposure and that open-mindedness. And I think that's really important, because what I see in schools as well is that often when international languages are taught, there is a massive tussle, from parents to teachers. I deviate a bit, but the point of saying that is because people do not necessarily understand the point of learning a language that they don't immediately relate to, right? So Europeans would not understand the point of learning Mandarin, and Asians do not understand the point of learning other European languages. So I think just having that kind of open-mindedness and having exposure to it, sounds like it really give you a good, base to build your language learning on. And, one thing that struck me was that, reading books, being a loner, being a nerd, I think every poet needs to be that at some level, right? And then being in love as well. I think all of that really contributes to the building of a poet. So that's quite rich and interesting. You have spoken a little bit about your early interactions with other cultures and languages, and you did mention in our last event about how you had Indian friends who introduced you to Bollywood movies, and then eventually you did start learning Urdu through that. But I'd be very interested in knowing the details of that process and how it happened, and through Bollywood, how did you discover Urdu poetry specifically?
So as a bit of a premise, when I was 17 years old, I moved to Malaysia because I won a scholarship to a high school exchange in Malaysia. And my family, I mean, my host family in Malaysia that I lived with, they happen to be Malaysian Indians because Malaysia has a big Indian diaspora from the colonial era. And whenever we would go to weddings, there was this very catchy songs playing, like Sheila Ki Jawani or whatever, Chikni Chameli, all these Bollywood songs, very peppy and very upbeat. And I was like, wow, this music is actually catchy. I like it. And so when I describe my Hindi, Urdu, what I call it Hindustani, my Hindustani learning journey, I always say that the first things I picked up was the Bollywood language, like Divana, Ye Javani Hai Divani, whatever, Gulabi Aankhe, whatever. And so even though I was not actively learning Urdu or Hindi, I was sort of picking up a lot of things from the songs, a lot of very basic vocab. And in the pandemic, in 2020, I actually happened to be, well, I was still in the Netherlands for my bachelor's, and I was in lockdown in this apartment. Not sure if I said master's earlier. I think, well, it was actually bachelor's in the Netherlands. I think I got confused and said master's, but anyway, it was bachelor's in the Netherlands. And so I was there, I was in lockdown, and I had this big book called Urdu Grammar, very concise title, but it's actually in Italian. It was for Italian learners of Urdu. And I was like, you know what? I have free time now. Let's delve into this. And I started understand the inner workings of the language. So, the typical stuff you learn, like conjugations, masculine and feminine, plurals, whatever. And that's like, I think throughout the pandemic, it always sounds a bit privileged to talk about blessings in disguise in the pandemic, but a blessing in disguise of the lockdown was that I actually really stepped up my Urdu and Hindi learning. I had much more time to watch movies. I went on a Bollywood movies spree. I've yet to watch Pakistani movies and dramas. I hear they're very good, but I did not find the time yet. And usually I stick to Netflix. Yeah, I'm too lazy to pirate stuff. And yeah, like throughout 2020, it was a bit of a revolution for my own Hindi and Urdu. Like they became, I'm not sure I would say fluent, but I became quite proficient in it. And I also started putting down my first poems. My first Urdu or Hindi, whatever, poem was actually in 2019. And it was my first attempt because the Indian embassy in The Hague, in the Netherlands, was organizing this mushaira. In Hindi, it's called the Kavi Sammelan. And I wanted to participate. And so I jotted down a little thing, which I can read even now. I know the poetry part is later, but let me just get it. Okay, it was called the Rav, as in secret. And it went like this. सुबह का राज सूरज है, धरती का राज है फूल, शाम का राज तारा है, नदी का राज है पुल, as in bridge. रात का राज चांद है, बाग का राज है गुल, सारे राज प्रकट होते हैं दिल की आंखों से, ये बात तू न भूल, मेरी रूह का राज कविता है और मेरे जीवन में इश्क है राज बिल्कुल. And this was my first ever Hindi Urdu poem. I barely knew the distinction between Hindi and Urdu back in those days. But yeah, this is like, I usually hate my old poems, but I recognize this is still quite decent. And in 2020, I started trying out with ghazals, and I just had no idea how ghazals actually work, like the meter, like scanning the meter, beher, takti, aruz, whatever. I remember my first attempt at a ghazal was something like Mere Dilbar Neyati and Nobahar Neyati. And I didn't know that Dilbar and Nobahar don't even rhyme, but in my mind they did because I didn't know the distinction between a short vowel and a long vowel. Um, and um, and yeah, and the last thing, because I'm always afraid I get too talkative, but the last thing is that in those days, in the pandemic days, I also had with me an amazing anthology of poems and literature, Urdu literature, called A Thousand Yearnings by, I think the author is Ralph Russell. And it's a great initiation into Urdu poetry. It's very good. And I think that's also where I learned what a ghazal actually is, what a nazm is, who Mirza Ghalib or Mir Taqi Mir are. And after that it's been quite uphill. I like practicing and reading. I improved my understanding of meter, I improved my vocabulary, and yeah, it's a work in progress. And I think language learning never really stops. There's always like new things you can learn even in our own languages. And yeah, so that's let's say what brought me here. Yeah.
Very interesting journey. Thank you for sharing it. And I would say that, even your early poems are quite good. Like you yourself said, it's very decent. I would love to know, the way, like you've spoken about how you were reading a lot of poetry. And of course that, is always a very good input to, and a necessary one to learning to write and understand, the meter and the rhythm and so on. But not being exposed to people speaking the language, right? Because you didn't have, I imagine that you didn't have a crowd of, Urdu poets around you. How did you, learn and figure out how it's supposed to sound, and how did you learn to recite in rhythm? And, because of course, one feeds into the other, right? The way you write and the way you recite kind of, helps the whole process. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think in general, as a bit of a principle, language learning, or maybe even just learning in general, is very hard to pursue all by yourself. I think we are social animals, to put it in a very political science way, and we all kind of learn more when we are engaging with other people who pursue the same passion. And in my case, you're right. It was, and it still is, a very lonely journey sometimes. It's very challenging to improve the language, improve my language, and improve my poetry when I'm not actively exposed to neither of them. The only time I've been in India was in 2018. It was for only 2 months, and it was in Tamil Nadu. So like people didn't even speak Hindi. And I've never been to Pakistan. I've not had a chance to go to Pakistan yet. And these are things that really, I don't know, I feel a pain. I feel a khaish and tamanna and all these things to go back to South Asia, And what really helped me was I'm Gen Z, and I will say it was Instagram, because I was connecting to so many amazing pages dedicated to Urdu poetry. For example, Brown Verses is an amazing page. Urdu Dan was this guy, Amir, who's also a poet, and he noticed me, and so he was the first one to kind of give me a bit of a space in the world of Urdu poetry. We had a bit of we had an Instagram live back in the day, and that was very encouraging and very motivating to know that people were enjoying what I was doing. And we're also kind of providing, maybe a bit indirectly, but they were providing guidance as to how to learn Urdu, because they were sharing content, they were sharing poems, they were sharing mahfils and mushairas. Um, there are so many amazing people, virtual friends, or almost a virtual family for me, that I could talk about, who really helped me throughout this time. And slowly I started learning, for example, takti, which is the scanning of an Urdu verse, and where like and how the meter unfolds. That was very challenging, for example, and I had many very patient people, very many patient Urdu speakers who guided me through this. So I would say now my understanding of meter is quite decent. And yeah, and before we move to anything else, I will say a small anecdote that is actually unrelated to Urdu, but is related to language learning and poetry and maybe art history in general. I was in the Netherlands and I tried my hand once at writing something in Dutch, and I had written a poem or a few poems. And this Dutch friend of mine, she had submitted them to her Dutch language teacher from high school or something. And this guy had replied by email, and he had said that there were mistakes in the poems. There were indeed mistakes, but it was these mistakes that sort of told my story. I was not a Dutch native speaker. I was just a guy who had just moved there and was passing by. And those mistakes were not something bad. They were part of my art. They were part of who I am. They were part of the story of this Italian guy who's trying out new languages and trying out to write poems. And that really changed my perception of, your art being imperfect, or your language having mistakes in it. As in, there is no shame in it, because it's like mistakes are also part of us in a way. Yeah, that was a very formative moment, formative experience.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I can see, how keen you were to learn to actually access those different Instagram pages, because everybody has a lot of information available to them these days. It's about, filtering through the right thing and also making strategic mistakes, I think, because flaws are important, but if our art is only flawed, obviously we all write. I think we all struggle with that at times, but, to get it decent enough, like you said, to have some kind of art and beauty in your work in poetry is it takes a lot of hard work. So really admire that. We before we move on to the Urdu recitations and so on, tell us a little bit more about the different languages that 15 languages and not stopping. So what are those languages?
Okay, I will list down like the laundry list, as I call it. But I have to premise that I'm not actually well versed in all of them, because, well, I think if whenever someone tells you they speak 15 languages, they're probably lying. They probably have studied 15 languages and they're struggling to keep them all up, and they're being very chaotic about it. So that's me, by the way. So I never say I actually speak these languages. I always say, yeah, I've learned, I've studied these languages, and it's always a work in progress, as I said. But so obviously my native language is Italian, and then there's English that we start learning in middle school. So maybe 11, 12 years old. Then there is French and German that I did in high school. And there's Spanish that I kind of picked up by myself and did a very short course on during high school as well. Then there's Chinese and Japanese, but my Japanese is totally gone. Japanese is a very challenging language. Then there's Malay, but Malay is very close to Indonesian, so you could say I also speak Indonesian very indirectly. And when I was in, Malaysia, I started picking up Tamil. But Tamil is one of the languages. Then there is Indian Urdu, obviously, and there is Persian, beautiful Persian, and probably living someone. Dutch. I was forgetting, and I know a tiny bit of Bengali, and that's it. These are the languages.
That's it, just a few of them, yeah.
yeah, right, just a handful.
Yeah, just a handful. Incredible. Okay. Sounds great. We'll move on to the next. Sorry, go on, Rafi.
Can I ask a small question as well? So Danielle, we just wanted to know, when you were trying to learn Urdu, did you find enough resources on internet to help you, like maybe dictionaries or language courses which were available online, which could help you, or there is a lack of such resources there?
Okay, that's a good question. Well, my main research was actually an Italian one. It was the Italian textbook I mentioned. It's called Grammatica Urdu. It's right there on the shelf. That's why I'm turning. And it's a very, very comprehensive grammar in Urdu. I mean, of Urdu in Italian, which sounds a bit confusing. And nowadays, if I want to, let's say, look up words, what I use is the Rekhta dictionary, which I think is very, very comprehensive. Now I'm sure there's not that many resources, but I know for a fact that there's textbooks for self-learners as well. So usually they go by the name of Colloquial Urdu or Teach Yourself Urdu. I know for sure they're there. And dictionaries probably. And yeah, I actually relied on a limited number of resources at the end of the day, but which proved to be very good. So yeah, that's it.
That's quite interesting. Daniel, I'll request you to comment a little bit on how, and this refers back to a chat we had about how you read so many Urdu poets and how you got access to those books and materials. Yeah, do tell everyone about that. Sorry, so you mentioned that you found Fairz's poems in a second-hand bookstore in
of course,
all the other how you got to read them. Yeah.
I was finding books here and there. I mean, my first exposure to Hindi and Urdu books was when I was in India, but I would be quite clueless about it. I would see Mirza Ghalib everywhere, and I didn't know who he was. I actually thought he might be a contemporary poet, and he's so popular and he's selling so many books. Good for him. Must be a very wealthy guy. And later it turns out I went to Delhi and I saw his dilapidated Haveli in Old Delhi, and I was like, okay, this guy lived from 200 years ago. And this name Mirza Ghalib kind of haunted me when I went back to the Netherlands. I was in a bookstore and actually found this book, which is it's Ghalib by Pritchett, who's the I think leading translator of Ghalib. And this book is amazing. It has everything I look for in a translation. Most Urdu or Hindi translators, I find it's a subjective opinion, but they try too hard to make the English version rhyme or have the English version with a similar meter and similar melody as the Urdu original, and very, very often the meaning is sacrificed for the sake of, this sort of artistry, showing that there's that the translator can make rhymes in English as well. It's a very good effort, but it's very, very hard to achieve that. And what Pritchett does is she's very, very literal, and I know many people might not like it as a translation, but by being literal, it's actually bringing you closer to what Mirza Ghalib was actually saying, or what Ahmad Faiz was saying, and so on. And it's almost a niche opinion, because literality it's usually judged a bit negatively, but I really, really appreciate that. And that was coupled with a lot of notes explaining what Ghalib actually meant. So if Ghalib was saying something like "Khune jigar," she would not translate it as whatever passion or pain, or she would just say liver's blood, and then explain what the liver meant in Urdu symbolism, in Urdu language symbolism. And that was very, very instructive and educational. And I think that's why I'm very attached to this book, and I really respect Usually, if some other white person is working with Urdu poetry, I'd be very jealous because I'm like, I want to be that. But Pritchard, like top-notch translator, and here and there, yes, I did find Urdu Hindi books. That would be a very challenging feat in Italy because the subcontinent culture is not very big here. But in London, it's a bit easier. So I also found a Fez anthology that I recently finished reading. In London, there is a bookstore called Shalimar, which has a lot of, I mean, it's totally centered on South Asia. I also have this one anthology, which is quite interesting. It is just called Urdu Ghazals and Anthology. Very concise, very mukhtasar title. But it has a lot of lesser known poets. And I actually kind of use this book to practice my meter scanning, my meter analysis. So a lot of pages, I fill them with me just noting down the syllables and whatever. And so yeah, that's how I slowly collected, made my little treasure, little khazana of Urdu and Hindi poetry.
Incredible. I think it just sounds to me like if you're very determined to learn something, you find a way. Because it does sound like the access, I mean, there's material there, but you know, just to be determined enough to go to these different bookstores around the world and, you know, to pick out the right books and then to read them. This, I would say, is a massive struggle with myself. Like I keep buying books, I don't always read them. So, you know, just the fact that you worked hard, you know, is great and it's very impressive. I'm going to deviate a bit from, you know, our initially planned conversation, and I'm going to ask another question, and that pertains to one of the very initial conversations that we had about Urdu and Hindi. You know, are they the same language? You know, and I've seen that you've produced quite a lot of material on that. I'd love to hear more from you because, especially, I think in the past few years, Urdu has become quite controversial. You know, particularly in certain groups and. Yeah, I mean, having experienced that, I would love to hear your outsider's perspective on this.
Yeah. I did write an article for this Indian-based magazine called Remnant Archive, and it was very successful. I think many people were resonating with my comments on how Urdu and Hindi kind of crystallize as different languages. And Urdu is definitely controversial, and I would go as far as saying that Urdu is actively threatened in India. I hear people saying that they're going around maybe with an anthology by Daniele Speziale or any other like Urdu poet, and because it's in the Urdu script, that is the Perso-Arabic script, the police will stop them and they will check their bags and stuff and profile them. And it's a paradox because if you think like Daniele Speziale, it has it in its name, in his name. He was from Delhi, and yet the discrimination in Urdu that's happening in India. And so that's a very complex topic that you asked me about because it's a very long history. I usually trace it back to the colonial era, and when the British took over South Asia, they wanted to deal the last blow to Mughal culture. They wanted to replace Mughal culture completely. And so a lot of people that the British employed were not Urdu-speaking Muslims. They were Hindi-speaking, well, not yet Hindi, but like Sanskrit-savvy Brahmins. And in British language policy in India was very much shaped by this need to create this sort of pure Hindi, what nowadays is called as Shuddha Hindi, there's pure Hindi, which is a very Sanskritized register of the language. And that's sort of how that's one major step in how Urdu and Hindi came to be considered as separate, because obviously you can speak a very Sanskritized register and that would be considered Hindi, or you can speak a very Persianized register and that would be considered Urdu. Now, what I find interesting is that this happens in no other language in the world. If I'm speaking Italian, I'm speaking Italian, and if I'm speaking English, I'm speaking English. That's about it. There's not something like I'm speaking Italian with Greek influence, and now I'm speaking it with Latin influence or whatever. It's just Italian. And that's how Hindustani, that is Hindi and Urdu, work. Depending on the vocabulary you use, it can be more close to Urdu. So you can say things like gulla or abr, or it can be more towards Hindi, and it can be pool, it can be badal, and so on. But I find that at the end of the day, it's a very artificial divide. It's always very hard to say where does Urdu start and Hindi begin. Pool could be used by anyone, badal could be used by anyone, and so could gul. And I like to see them as a continuum that goes, in a sense, from Persian on one hand and Sanskrit on the other. Neither is right or wrong or ugly or pretty or whatever, but the more you go towards one direction, the more Urdu it is, and the more you go to the other direction, the more Hindi it is. So it's even like in a sense, it's a very beautiful situation that should be appreciated. If you're a writer in Delhi or in Karachi or in Mumbai, wherever, you can draw from so many languages and from so many influences to color your poetry or your novels or your art, whatever. And yeah, it's just obviously politicized, and obviously there's these politics of hatred which are very common in South Asia. And yeah, sometimes I'm a bit pessimistic about politics, but we're not gonna get into that. And this is my take on the history of the language.
I think you do explain it very well. Thank you for that, and I appreciate it as well. It has become quite controversial. Even when we had our event earlier this year, I had a lot of people, being surprised that we actually got approval for it because, there was a heavy Urdu influence in that. Just because of how controversial the language has become. But I think you explained it very well. I do agree with you that it is an opportunity to I think diversity is always an opportunity to, for enrichment rather than, for controversy. But thank you for explaining that. I would now, move to the part of the event that I'm sure everybody's waiting for, and that's the recitations from you, and also, asking Rafi to recite for you. What I do want to start with is, and this is on a lighter note, of course, when we were speaking on the WhatsApp group the other day, you made a comment that we're not going to let you off easy for, and that was that my personality, Mirza Ghalib. So tell us.
Okay, I kind of already spoken about how I met Mirza Ghalib. And yeah, at first I was just so confused about everything. Who is this guy? What is he saying? Why are his poems so complex? If you read the anthology that I suggested, it's like half of it is the poems and half of it is explaining the poems. The explanation is not exhaustive because there are so many interpretations for each verse of each couplet. It's crazy. And I was reading it, and I thought it was difficult for sure, but also quite quirky. It was interesting that he was using all this imagery and what they meant, and they were often like very humorous. So like as he says, निकालना खुद से आदम का सुनते आए लेकिन बहुत बेआबरू होकर तेरे कुचे से हम निकले. Like he's been disgraced and he's like walking out of the beloved lane, like Adam was kicked out of paradise basically. I thought it was very funny and a very interesting way of writing poems. There's a bit of there's always a layer of self-loathing in Ghalib, which I sadly I kind of relate to. And there's always this tension between the optimism and the pessimism. So he did not have a very happy life. He was always searching for money. He was an alcoholic. He had problems with alcohol. He had problems with gambling. He was arrested by the British for gambling and all these things. And something like the one thing that strikes me the most is that so many people were making fun of him when he was alive. People would go to him and be like, "Hey, Galib, you know, I found this verse in the Divan," and then the verse that they read would be something like, "The egg of the buffalo is in the egg of the swan," and stuff like that. And Galib would be like, "What is this? I never wrote anything like that." And people would bully him, saying, "Yeah, this is how complex you and meaningless your poetry sounds," you know, like. And Galib would kind of be maybe a bit demoralized, but never really giving up. And I think that's admirable. And I think it's cool to have a poet who's a bit of an underdog also. He was called Mushkil Pasan. He likes the difficult stuff. One thing that cemented my love for Mirza Ghalib was, I think, at the turn between 2020 and 2021. It was still the pandemic, and it was also the time where when Jashn-e Rekhta happens. It was my first time following Jashn-e Rekhta. For those who don't know, it's this festival dedicated to Urdu poetry. And there was someone, I'm not sure, maybe it was even Pritchett herself. She was analyzing some Urdu couplets by Ghalib. And there were some which I thought were very powerful. So what Ghalib does, obviously he draws from this Indo-Persian imagery, and one imagery he uses often is that of the pearl, the gohar, which in Indo-Persian mythology, pearls are formed when some raindrop clashes on the ocean surface, and falling to the bottom of the ocean, it becomes a pearl. And so there are a couple couplets by Ghalib where he uses this imagery, and one of them, a bit complex, he says, "Dam e har mauj mein hai, halkahe sad kam e nahang." दाम हर मौज में है हल्का है सदका में नहंग देखें क्या गुजरे है खत्ते पे गुहर होते तक. And so what this means is that in the folds of every wave, every moj, there's 100 circle. Bear with me, it's very complex. There's 100 circles of mouths of these nahang, these sort of marine monster, dragon, crocodile, whatever. So in every wave there is the circle of 100-mouthed dragons, monsters, whatever. Look what the droplet has to go through to become a pearl. So that's a metaphor for all the difficulties of life, which is like Sadkam and Nahang, like 100 mouths of the Nahang monster. And another very beautiful one, similar one by Ghalib, is Tawfiq ba andaza himmat hai azal se, aankhon mein hai wo qatra ke gohar na hua tha. So Tawfiq, like success and blessings, azal se, since forever. They're always dependent. They're always proportionate to himmat, to your courage, to your daringness. And the droplet that doesn't become a gohar, that doesn't become a pearl, is a qatra. It's a tear in the akome, in the eyes. So we're assuming it's the eyes of a beloved. So it's very nice way to end up for a droplet anyway. And these couplets really made me fall in love with Mirza Ghalib. They're my favorite. It's couplets to ponder on. It's couplets that you tell yourself when things are hard. And yeah.
Oh, that's incredible and beautiful. I'm going to hand over to Rafi and to you as well, just to, recite poetry, engage with each other through poetry.
Right. Thank you, Daniel. It's so much fun. I really want this session to go on. Uh, so Ghalib is, of course, my favorite as well, and I don't think there's any poet better than Ghalib. I
Yeah.
से कहते हैं गालिब हम लोग मैं इसको कहता हूँ कि गालिब की craving होती है. We have craving of Ghalib. After a little while, you start, you have start craving for Ghalib, and you want to read again, and so that's like him. So Ghalib and Mir both are great poets of that era. The only difference between Mir and Ghalib is that Ghalib was absolutely self-critical, and he edited his work and only selected very, very few of his work to be eventually printed and taken forward. Mir also is a very big poet and of the same quality in a lot of ways, Mir Taqi Mir, but he printed everything. So for Mir, you will find like a very big volume of ghazals, but Ghalib, you will only have a very small little, 80, 100 pages book, which is all about it. And that 100-page book made Ghalib the greatest poet in Urdu. I think it just speaks of the kind of work that Ghalib has done. Anyway, so just I have two quick things to read for you. For your love of Ghalib, I tried to select a ghazal which kind of shows what you are a little bit. Although in a ghazal there are a lot of different topics, so there are different topics in this ghazal as well, but there are a few couplets which are very close to what we have just seen. Okay, and then while this session was happening, I wrote 3 lines for you as well, just now, and they're very raw, but I will read them in any case. Okay, so Ghalib ki ghazal hai. I'm reading this for you. बज़्म शहंशाह में अशार का दफ्तर खुला. बज़्म शहंशाह में अशार का दफ्तर खुला. रखियो यारब ये दरे गंजीन है गौहर खुला. And गौहर इसमें भी है. Okay, as you just said, it's coincidental by the way. बज़्म शहंशाह में अशार का दफ्तर खुला. रखियो यारब ये दरे गंजीन है गौहर खुला. शब हुई फिर अंजुमे रख्शिंदा का मंजर खुला. शब हुई फिर अंजुमे रख्शिंदा का मंजर खुला. इस तकल्लुफ से कि गोया बुत कदे का दर खुला. इस तकल्लुफ से कि गोया बुत कदे का दर खुला. गर्चे हूँ दीवाना पर क्यों दोस्त का खाऊं फरेब. गर्चे हूँ दीवाना पर क्यों दोस्त का खाऊं फरेब. आस्ती में दशना पिन्हा हाथ में नश्तर खुला. गो न समझूं उसकी बातें गो न पाऊं उसका भेद. पर ये क्या कम है कि मुझसे वो परी पैकर खुला. What a beautiful couplet this one is. गो न समझूं उसकी बातें गो न पाऊं उसका भेद. पर ये क्या कम है कि मुझसे वो परी पैकर खुला. है ख्याले हुस्न में हुस्ने अमल का सा ख्याल. है ख्याले हुस्न में हुस्ने अमल का सा ख्याल. खुल्द का एक दर है मेरी गोर के अंदर खुला. यानी मेरी कब्र के अंदर जन्नत का एक दरवाजा खुला हुआ है ख्याले हुस्न में हुस्ने अमल का सा ख्याल. खुल्द का एक दर है मेरी गोर के अंदर खुला. दर पे रहने को कहा और कह के कैसा फिर गया. दर पे रहने को कहा और कह के कैसा फिर गया. जितने अरसे में मेरा लिपटा हुआ बिस्तर खुला. गालिब की विट अगर आपको देखनी है तो इस शेर में बहुत अच्छी नजर आ रही है. दर पे रहने को कहा और कह के कैसा फिर गया. जितने अरसे में मेरा लिपटा हुआ बिस्तर खुला. क्या रहूं गुर्बत में खुश जब हो हवादिस का ये हाल. क्या रहूं गुर्बत में खुश जब हो हवादिस का ये हाल. नामा लाता है वतन से नामा बर खुला. तो लेटर्स खोल खोल के पहले से पढ़ के लोग फिर भेजते हैं कि ये सेफ है भेजना कि नहीं. और ये आखिरी शेर है, ये रबीउल अव्वल का महीना है, तो गालिब देखिए बहुत कम शेर हैं थोड़े रिलीजियस उसके ऊपर हैं, लेकिन ये वाला शेर गालिब का जो है ये थोड़ा सा रिलीजन के ऊपर है। और उसकी उम्मत में हूँ मैं, उसकी उम्मत में हूँ मीन्स के प्रॉफिट मोहम्मद की उम्मत basically। उसकी उम्मत में हूँ मैं, मेरे रहें क्यों काम बंद, वास्ते जिस शह के गालिब गुम्बदे बेदर खुला। यानी आसमान का वो मेराज के वाक़े को रेफर कर रहे हैं गालिब। तो बज़्म शहंशाह में अशार का दफ्तर खुला, रखियो यारब ये दरे गंजीन है गौहर खुला। दिस इज फॉर यू।
Thank you. That's a big honor to be, you know, to be dedicated to the Ghalib poem. Even, yeah, I will have to learn this one next. You know, I will have to sit down and note down all the words I don't know
Yes, and I
and
can
make
help
sure
you.
I understand it as best as possible. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and quickly, I just wrote three couplets for you. I have to add more to it, but right now just three shares. जिनको बात कहनी हो जबान ढूंढ लेते हैं, जिनको बात कहनी हो जबान ढूंढ लेते हैं, और जब नज्म लिखनी हो उन्वान ढूंढ लेते हैं। खा रोम की गलियां हों या दिल्ली के बाजार, खा रोम की गलियां हों या दिल्ली के बाजार, उर्दू चाहने वाले कदरदान ढूंढ लेते हैं।
Thank you.
ख्वारूम की गलियां हों या दिल्ली के बाजार, उर्दू चाहने वाले कदरदान ढूंढ लेते हैं। कुएं तक प्यासा पहुंचे या प्यासे तक कुआं, कुएं तक प्यासा पहुंचे या प्यासे तक कुआं, जिन्हें प्यास बुझानी हो इम्कान ढूंढ लेते हैं।
That's amazing. Thank you. क्या कहना?
I still have to fare it, and I have to put it properly on the meter, and I will share it to you once it's complete.
Thank you, thank you. And as you all know, I also have my Jawab mein Nazam, a little poem I wrote in response, which is well, I would say it's dedicated to the whole Urdu speaking community and the whole of South Asia, I guess. And it's obviously inspired by Nadir's poem, and it's called Goke Bo Mulk. जवाब में of गो के वो शायर is गो के वो मुल्क। गो के वो मुल्क मुझसे कुछ दूर था, वो जुबान मेरी हुई मेरा मकसद उबूर था। शायरों का हर लफ्ज मुझे इतना गयूर था, मेरे मुंह में जैसे कोई सरमस्त अंगूर था। मीर और गालिब का सुरूर था, अल्लामा इकबाल का शुऊर था। फैज व फराज के हुजूर में इनकिलाब जरूर था। गो कि वो मुल्क मुझसे कुछ दूर था, वो जुबान मेरी हुई मेरा मकसद उबूर था। Yeah.
Beautiful.
Thank you, thank you. Shukriya, shukriya.
Absolutely beautiful. I love the exchange of poetry that has just taken place. Daniel, it would be unfair before, to end this without having you recite some more of your poetry, if you have any, or, any poems that you would like to share at this point.
Yes, I will read my first proper ghazal. This was the first ghazal that actually followed meter and that I was actually first satisfied with, and I wrote it in I think 2021. So yeah, okay. तू जब तक रहेगी मैं काफिर रहूंगा, तू जब तक रहेगी मैं काफिर रहूंगा, तेरी याद के बुत का मंदिर रहूंगा। तू जब तक रहेगी मैं काफिर रहूंगा, तेरी याद के बुत का मंदिर रहूंगा। नजर में तेरे एक सड़क ने पुकारा, नजर में तेरे एक सड़क ने पुकारा, वही चलते चलते मुसाफिर रहूंगा। तू गुल सी जगाती जहां की मोहब्बत, तू गुल सी जगाती जहां की मोहब्बत, मैं शर्मीला बुलबुल सा शायर रहूंगा। तो गुल्फी जगाती जहां की मोहब्बत, मैं शर्मीला बुलबुल सा शायर रहूंगा। मुसीबत मुसीबत गुजरती ये हस्ती, मुसीबत मुसीबत गुजरती ये हस्ती, मसरत मसरत मुहाजिर रहूंगा।
Oh, beautiful.
शुक्रिया शुक्रिया. And this one is a bit Sufiana. हर अहले तलब अपना सी मुर्ग पाया, हर अहले तलब अपना सी मुर्ग पाया, बजुज मैं जो वादी का ताइर रहूंगा. It's inspired by this Conference of the Birds poem where everyone's looking for the Simurg who represents God. And meanwhile, I'm just wandering in my valleys, in my body, and here. Pugan ho, sitam ho, bala ho, alam ho. Pugan ho, sitam ho, bala ho, alam ho. Isummi de waslat ki khatir rahunga.
Wow, बहुत अच्छे.
और शुक्रिया शुक्रिया. और आखिरी, तेरे कूचे में है निकम्मों का एक झुंड, तेरे कूचे में है निकम्मों का एक झुंड, शबो रोज मैं जिसमें हाजिर रहूंगा.
वाह 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 वाह, बहुत अच्छे.
शुक्रिया शुक्रिया, बहुत शुक्रिया. And you let me know, Muniba. I can even read another one, or
Please go ahead. We're really enjoying this. Go ahead.
okay, sure, okay. This one is a bit more recent. Okay, I was thinking of some context, but I don't even remember. I always write my poems when I'm on public transport for some reason. Like, I'll be on a train and looking out on the scenery and... Okay, anyway. इश्क की बातें सुनता रहता हूँ, इश्क की बातें सुनता रहता हूँ, महफिलों में बहुत अकेला हूँ. इश्क की बातें सुनता रहता हूँ, महफिलों में बहुत अकेला हूँ. मुर्दा हूँ, जिंदा हूँ, तड़पता हूँ. मुर्दा हूँ, जिंदा हूँ, तड़पता हूँ. क्या हूँ मैं? एक अधूरी इच्छा हूँ. इच्छा मतलब ख्वाहिश नहीं है. क्या हूँ मैं? एक अधूरी इच्छा हूँ. शाख से दूर एक पत्ता हूँ, शाख से दूर एक पत्ता हूँ. वायु चलती तो मैं भी चलता हूँ. वायु मतलब हवाएं ही. शहर के खिलते रहते जंगल में, शहर के खिलते रहते जंगल में, वुसअते दश्त को तरसता हूँ.
वाह.
ठीक है. शहर के खिलते रहते जंगल में, वुसअते दश्त को तरसता हूँ. तू शहर के उभरते रंगो नूर, तू शहर के उभरते रंगो नूर, मैं पुरस्कार शब का सहरा हूँ.
वाह.
तू शहर का उभरते रंगो नूर, मैं पुरस्कार शब का सहरा हूँ. नगरी नगरी नए मिले हैं दोस्त, नगरी नगरी नए मिले हैं दोस्त, क्यों घर आकर मैं इतना तन्हा हूँ.
वाह.
नगरी नगरी नए मिले हैं दोस्त, क्यों घर आकर मैं इतना तन्हा हूँ. क्या बड़े ख्वाब राही और क्या शौक, क्या बड़े ख्वाब राही और क्या शौक, खाक का गर्चे एक जर्रा हूँ.
वाह, बहुत अच्छे.
शुक्रिया. Thank you. This is it. I prefer these two because I cannot reveal all the cards up my sleeve, you know, Muniba. Then for the next mahfil, I won't have anything left to recite.
No, this is beautiful. Thank you. Yes, exactly. I agree with you. Just keep us, looking forward to more. But thank you. Very, very beautiful poetry. Really enjoyed the
Thank you.
conversation as well, learning about your journey. Also, having others share it with you, learn others share poetry with you, but also, getting to know your journey as well. It's been incredible. I really look forward to more, to you continuing to write, because I feel like you're only getting started and it's already, so beautiful.
Yeah.
I would say that I hope, through Rawanee, you do find the community that you want. I know the WhatsApp group can be a good resource, but it can also be a little bit crowded with messages and everything. So feel free to reach out, to us, to the wider community through your journey, and we look forward to more.
Thank you very much. I also look forward to more.
Thank you.
It was definitely amazing. I don't know what to say. Bisubanu.
The pleasure's all ours. Sorry, Rafi, I feel like you're about to say something.
I was just saying it was, thank you for arranging it. It was a lot of fun. Daniel, please keep writing. I think you have a great talent in Urdu poetry. And I feel that, I mean, a lot of people can write it, but not many people come with such amazing thoughts and ideas. So I think you have both. So please continue writing it and inspiring us.
I will, hopefully. Inshallah. Khuda kare.
Inshallah.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.